I call this meeting to order. This is the 78th meeting of the Standing Committee on Finance, continuing our pre-budget consultations for 2012. We have with us here in the first panel, and we have two panels today. We have four organizations from 3:30 to 5 p.m. We have, first of all, the Canadian Natural Gas Vehicle Alliance. Secondly, the Grain Farmers of Ontario. Thirdly, the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada. And we have the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being with us here today. You each have 5 minutes for your opening statement, and then we'll have questions from members. So we will start with the Canadian Natural Gas Vehicle Alliance, please.
Great. Thank you. My name is Alicia Milner. I'm the President of the Canadian Natural Gas Vehicle Alliance. It's a privilege to appear today before the committee and to speak on behalf of Canada's natural gas vehicle industry. I'm here to share with you the challenges that are increasingly facing Canada in the area of jobs, growth, competitiveness, and achieving a sustainable environment. To share with you the rapid deployment that our largest trading partner to the south is making in close proximity to our shared border and how it can negatively impact our job retention, job creation, investment, and environmental outcomes if we don't pool our Canadian resources to get us on a more level North American playing field. In the brief time allotted to me today, I would like to highlight how responding to this increasing continental infrastructure challenge can not only contribute to job retention, but can also trigger more than $1.2 billion in private sector spending, lead to the creation of more than 1,200 new jobs, reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 1 megaton, and increase competitiveness while ensuring there are no job losses in the Canadian trucking industry resulting from lower-cost American LNG trucks operating in Canada. So first, let's consider what's happening with our largest trading partner, the U.S. While we're focused on pipeline projects and LNG exports, in the U.S., the private sector is rapidly moving forward with investments of more than $750 million that will transform the landscape for energy use for heavy trucks. LNG refueling stations are being built on interstate trucking corridors across the U.S. By switching to natural gas, trucking fleets will reduce their fuel costs by 40% and their emissions by 25%. Consumers will benefit because all food and consumer goods typically are delivered by truck. Now, I'd like to turn your attention to the map handout that was distributed and should be in front of you. You can see for yourself the viral infrastructure expansion taking place with our largest trading partner. You'll notice how rapidly their LNG station network and trucking corridors have grown in this year alone. And you can see this expansion has virtually all taken place across the southern and mid-U.S., and perhaps that's why this activity has not been receiving the attention it deserves here north of the border. But as you can also see from the map, this is about to immediately change in the coming months. Note, I said months, not years. As you can see, the growth of LNG refueling stations and corridors in the U.S. now starting to expand across Canada's immediate southern border and in the northeast U.S. From west to east, in proximity to some of Canada's densest population areas and in the lucrative northeast region, the Americans are expanding. Washington State, Idaho, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Virginia, and Maryland. And why? Because natural gas offers a lower-cost fuel choice for the trucking industry, an industry in which diesel fuel is the #1 expense. And with new vehicle regulations coming that reduce greenhouse gas emissions reductions or that require those reductions, that will make diesel trucks even more complex. Adopting natural gas now is a smart and timely business decision. So back to the map. Let's turn our attention to Canada. And I would respectfully ask you to compare the Canada map with the U.S. map. As you compare these maps, remember that more than 400,000 Canadians work in the trucking and transportation services sector. 2/3 of our trade with the U.S. moves by truck, and the majority of Canada's southbound trade goes through Ontario to the U.S. Central, Northeast, and South, the very areas where we are seeing the Americans invest to bring a more affordable, lower-emission fuel to the trucking industry, a fuel that Canadian trucking fleets will not be able to use, as they do not have access to this fuel in their own domestic market. So as you can see, this is a rather stark reality that confronts us, and that as more and more fleets switch to natural gas in the U.S., the market transformation that we are starting to see will pick up speed and further disadvantage Canada. We risk being left behind in a continental market and being forced to catch up at a later date and at a greater cost. We also risk the loss of significant new capital investments that will be made over the coming years to bring LNG into the market as a fuel for heavy trucks and for ships and locomotives. The private sector does not like unnecessary risk. As the market starts to grow for LNG as a transportation fuel in the U.S., it can be expected that private sector companies with a choice between investing in U.S. or Canada will favor the U.S., given the larger, more concentrated market and the head start we're currently witnessing with LNG station and corridor build-out. Canada has an opportunity to act now. Industry is ready to invest, but we need government to partner with us in order to level the playing field for Canadian fleets who also would very much like to have the choice of a lower-cost, lower-emission fuel that also happens to be Canadian. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now hear from the Grain Farmers of Ontario, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, honourable members, and thank you, Chair and members of the committee, for providing Grain Farmers of Ontario the opportunity to speak on behalf of our 28,000 members growing corn, soybeans, and wheat in the province of Ontario. My name is Henry Van Akem. I farm near Alma, Ontario, just north of Guelph, and I am the chairman of Grain Farmers of Ontario. Our members produce over 9 million tons of grain on 5 million acres. Our production generates $3.3 billion in farm gate receipts, results in $6 billion in economic output, and over 50,000 Canadian jobs. In the Canadian context, Ontario is the largest agricultural province with $9.3 billion in sales, and in grain production we are the third largest producing province after Alberta and Saskatchewan. In March of 2013, the agricultural industry in Canada will complete a 5-year policy framework called Growing Forward. The entire industry has been working with government over the last couple of years through a consultative process to define the broad sector needs within the next policy framework. In the last few months, more details of the business risk management programs have been released, and the non-business risk management components are still in discussion, although provincial allocations of funds have been decided. Although I don't intend to dwell on the past, I would be remiss if I didn't register our disappointment with the cuts to the federal business risk management suite of programs, or more specifically AgriStability and AgriInvest. The agriculture and agri-food sector is one of the largest contributors to the Canadian economy, which provides 1 in 8 jobs, employs 2 million people, and accounts for over 8% of Canada's total economic output. We are pleased, however, with the increased commitment the government has made in Growing Forward to the areas of research and market access. These investments will have a significant impact on the future success of our sector. At this point, we know that nationally more money will be available for initiatives like science clusters, the advancement of the bioproduct sector, and an aggressive trade agenda that will include the growth of markets key to Ontario's grain producers like Japan and the EU. What we don't know right now are the details of how national programs will prioritize opportunities and give appropriate oversight required to meet national goals. We are here today to bring the concern of program equity to the Finance Committee when it comes to programming and growing forward too. Now that the broad program funding envelope has been decided, it is important to our members that clear program objectives be established and that guidelines for equity between provinces and producers be put in place for national programs. It has been a concern of many of our farmer members that despite our province being the largest for agricultural production, many of the national programs and infrastructure investments, particularly within the grain sector, appear to prioritize Western Canada. Our experience with the science clusters in the previous framework illustrates the basis for this perception. The Canadian corn, soybean, and wheat commodity organizations from Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, and the Maritimes formed an alliance to apply for cluster funding in 2010 when the program was first announced. Our proposal was declined for funding for not meeting the criteria of a national scope, despite the fact that our crops are only grown in the provinces represented within the alliance. In 2010, 70% of the program money was spent in Western Canada, including the largest science cluster investment that was specific to crops grown in Western Canada. We hope that this new policy framework is a new start, and with additional funding, there is a new opportunity to make significant scientific and trade advancements. In Ontario, where agriculture and agri-food is the largest economic driver in the province, investments can be made where the value gained can be realized right through the value chain. In winter wheat plant breeding, as an example, a 5-year annual federal government investment of $200,000 a year, matched by industry and farmers, will increase the competitiveness of our third largest cash crop by increasing yield by 2% per year, improving the milling and baking quality of our wheat to increase high-value market opportunities, and reducing production losses from insects and diseases by 50%.
Okay, 1 minute left.
Most of our anticipated winter wheat breeding advancements will advantage the Canadian baking industry also. 60% of Canada's bakeries are located in Ontario within just a few hundred kilometres of our 1 million acre wheat growing region. Additionally, Ontario winter wheat has the advantage of being produced within 8 hours drive of 130 million consumers living in 2 of Canada's richest cities and 11 of the top 20 wealthiest U.S. states. The value generated by the 1 million acres of Ontario winter wheat is $1 billion in sales revenue and over 7,000 Canadian jobs, and that is our third largest cash crop in the province. Unfortunately, without broad government goals for innovation and strong oversight, opportunities like this one will be missed when retiring researchers and the need for program cuts coincide as they have recently. As we prepare for another 5-year policy framework, Grain Farmers of Ontario is excited about the many opportunities in our sector for innovation and increased market access. Our organization is prepared to invest in these opportunities as well because we truly believe that significant value can be added in their grain sector, and we look forward to working with government to invest strategically in opportunities that benefit all Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll now hear from the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada, please.
My name is Shannon Bittman, and I'm a National Vice President with the Institute representing 60,000 federal public service workers across Canada. We're very pleased to be here participating in the House Finance Committee's pre-budget process. Our submission identified a few of our key concerns, which I would like to touch on briefly today. Firstly, dealing with economic recovery and growth. Our country is currently laboring through a slow and extremely weak recovery from a serious and damaging recession. Lessons learned from the recent European experience, including Greece, United Kingdom, Spain, and Ireland, have shown that severe spending cuts can be counterproductive and result in even worse economic outcomes: higher unemployment, lower revenues, slower economy, and even a much higher deficit. In the Wall Street Journal last February, the world's 2 leading credit rating firms, Moody and Fitch, criticized Canada's deep budget cuts as unnecessary and counterproductive in the context of a fragile economic recovery. In our submission, we recommend that the federal government put an end to its indiscriminate and wide-ranging program cuts and explore alternative sources of savings and revenue generation, such as eliminating further corporate tax reductions. We highlight wasteful outsourcing practices which should be targeted. For example, contracting out services, especially in the case of Shared Services Canada, and the need to reinvest these savings in key regulatory functions such as the food inspection system. Job creation. The jobs that have been lost in previous rounds of budget cuts through the strategic expenditure review process starting in 2007 and the 2010 budget, which froze operating budgets of all departments and agencies, and now, more recently, as a result of the 2011 budget, the Deficit Reduction Action Plan, are adversely affecting the Canadian job market and the Canadian economy as a whole. It is estimated that approximately 19,200 jobs will be eliminated in the federal public service under DRAP alone, which will have a ripple effect on the private sector with up to another 40,000 job losses anticipated. In fact, these cuts will also impact on job creation by removing direct and valuable services, such as those at regional development agencies, which provide critical support for potential entrepreneurs and small business owners at a time when the economy needs innovation and new businesses to grow. Given the economic circumstances, we recommend that the federal government refrain from any further job cuts to protect the fragile economic recovery and job recovery in the private sector. Productivity and public science. I would like to draw the committee's attention to the serious challenge now facing our country's future prosperity and the health of our citizens and that of their environment. I am referring to the current government's single-minded and narrow-minded attack on the science and evidence that is essential for effective and credible decision-making and to protect the public good. From the long-form census to the world-renowned experimental lakes area, from the National Roundtable on Environmental and Economy to the Polar Environment Atmospheric Research Laboratory, from environmental emergencies response capacity to habitat management and ecology labs that contribute to our fisheries' health and sustainability. This government's decisions are scarring the scientific landscape of our country and putting at risk the health and prosperity of future generations of Canadians. By cutting a whole host of research-based programs, Canada is losing its capacity for sound, evidence-based policy decisions and eliminating services that provide real value to Canadians. With regards to demographic change, Canadians need a comprehensive defined benefit pension plan in order that all Canadians can retire with dignity. And there's a direct correlation between countries with the most comprehensive public pension plans and poverty rates for seniors. By ensuring that retirees can depend on a predefined pension, public pension plans such as the Old Age Security and the Guaranteed Income Supplement can be redirected towards those who need it the most. Our solution is to secure income retirement by requiring mandatory CPP increases. We recommend that this government promote and encourage employers to offer defined benefit pension plans and to implement mandatory increases to CPP.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. We'll hear now from the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Tom King, and I'd like to thank you for the invitation to appear before this committee and to offer comments on proposed measures for inclusion in the 2013 federal budget on behalf of the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada. I am the co-chair of the PDAC Finance and Tax Committee and an associate tax partner at KPMG LLP. The PDAC is a national association representing more than 10,000 members involved in the mineral exploration and development industry, both in Canada and around the world. The mining sector creates jobs and economic stimulus in some of the remotest communities in Canada. In 2010, the mining industry employed 308,000 people, contributed $36 billion to the national GDP, and paid $5.5 billion to governments in taxes and royalties. Mineral exploration and mining are the lifeblood of many rural and remote communities throughout Canada and represent the largest private sector of Aboriginals in Canada. Canada is recognized as a leader in mineral exploration, development, financing, mining and related technologies, services, and activities. In 2011, we led all countries with 18% of the world's mineral exploration spending. Australia was second at 13%. The TSX Venture Exchange, is #1 in equity capital raised for mining and #1 in listed mining companies with 58% of the world's total. At the end of 2011, 43% or 1,646 companies were listed on the TSX Ventures TSX Exchange were from the mining sector. In comparison, the Australian Exchange lists 700, the New York Stock Exchange lists 141. One of the most influential elements of Canada's exploration leadership is attributable in part on measures included in our tax system to assist the junior mining industry in raising equity. More specifically, provisions in respect of flow-through share financing, which assists both early-stage grassroots exploration and funding in the significant costs incurred to bring a mine into production, and the Mineral Exploration Tax Credit, which I'll refer to as METC, which is focused solely on funds raised to undertake early-stage grassroots exploration in Canada. These are the lifeblood of the junior mining industry. Mr. Chairman, the METC is vitally important as exploration companies have no production revenue. Most are small businesses who rely on investors willing to support the high-risk nature of exploration. As the research and development branch of the mining sector, exploration companies do not have production revenue and rely on investors who are prepared to support their high-risk activities. The ongoing global financial crisis and contraction of the equity markets have had a dramatic and negative effect on the exploration sector. While precious metals and some base metals continue to see relatively good pricing, which has benefited our operating mines, the junior exploration sector is currently facing a downturn. Reduced investments lead to fewer drilling programs and negatively impact regional employment and income, particularly in rural, northern, and Aboriginal communities. Our concern is that without sustained and effective exploration, Canadian mineral production will outstrip additions to its reserves, jeopardizing the country's smelters and refiners and placing the domestic mining industry at risk.
1 minute.
We believe the government has a role to play in contributing to the stability of this sector. The METC was introduced in 2000 and has consistently provided Canada with one of our competitive advantages and helps to provide Canadians with attractive domestic investment opportunities. Our recommendation is not only to renew the METC, but to make the 15% mineral exploration tax credit a permanent feature of the federal tax system. This will provide our industry with the long-term certainty to plan crucial investments in exploration programs, which by their very nature span a multiple of years. We believe our recommendation meets the objectives set out in the pre-budget consultation, and we further believe a vibrant mineral sector in Canada creates jobs in all regions of the country, sustains communities, fosters new business opportunities, and raises tax revenues that allow governments to meet social needs. Thank you for your time, your consideration, and your commitment to improving the economic and social conditions for Canadians.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We will begin members' questions with Mr. Caron, s'il vous plaît, pour 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup et merci à vous tous.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank all of you for being here today, and it's very interesting to hear your presentations on such a wide variety of subject. I will start with Mr. Van Enkem. I come from a riding with a lot of agriculture in grains, in the dairy industry and other areas. So I have a question to ask that farmers ask me very often. You spoke in your brief about family farms, and people who talk to me in my writing talk about the challenges they face and that family farms are facing, particularly competition with major agricultural producers and corporations. What do you think of the government's current policies concerning family farms? Do you feel like the rules of the game allow family farms to succeed, whether it be in grain farming or in other areas? And the second question that I have, and I'll ask you to please answer both of them at the same time, is that another issue that might affect the grain farming industry, when we talk about exports, or rather the import of products into Canada, our farmers need to respect a number of standards which are not imposed on the products that are imported into Canada. And that, of course, has an effect on the ability of our farmers to compete. So is that something that is affecting the grain sector, and how can the government deal with this issue?
For your question, and there's a number of different aspects there to it. Certainly, the core of farming in Canada is still the family farm, and while I think it's important to acknowledge the definition of the family farm has probably changed a bit over the years in that families have adapted to different conditions, economic conditions around them, and we have seen family farms take on many structures. I myself, I am a family farm. I operate my farm with my wife and my 4 children, born and raised on a farm also. But I know sometimes we hear the slam against a corporate farm, but yet my family, we have chosen to, for a number of reasons, become a corporate identity to operate under. It's just a much better business vehicle for us. So I think we have to be a little bit careful in being too narrow in our definition of the family farm, because family farm can take on many different structures as they adapt to business conditions around them. On another aspect to your question there, when we think about imports coming into the country and different sets of rules and regulations for them as opposed to the conditions that we operate under with our domestically grown products, that is an area of concern. We do feel it is very important to have the same requirements of those imported products as we would experience here at home, to have an equal playing field of competitiveness between our industries.
Une minute. Je vais compléter avec vous encore une fois. Vous avez parlé du programme.
I have a follow-up question for you. You were speaking about how Agri-Invest was affected by the last budget. What specific recommendations do you have for that program, which not only stabilizes farm revenues and incomes, but also allows farmers to have access to a certain amount of capital, or at least to be able to get loans from banking institutions?
And specific to the Agri-Invest program, there was a reduction in the federal matching contribution to the farmer's contribution, and Agri-Invest is essentially a risk management tool for the producer to set aside some funds during a good year to be able to fall back on them in a year where the market returns were not as strong. The reduction from 1.5% down to 1% A&S contribution will be felt and is a negative impact to a farming operation.
Okay, thank you. Merci. Go to Mr. Van Kesteren, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for coming, and what a great group we've got here today. And I wish I had half an hour, because I think I have questions for all of you. I'm going to direct my questions to Ms. Milner, though. You've given us some incredible statistics. 400,000 Canadians that work in the truck and transportation sector. 2/3 of our trade, the U.S. moves by truck. I don't know if people really realize just how much trucking is a part of everybody's life. The natural gas is a very interesting and exciting new development. And we're talking about, of course, the liquefied natural gas. That's correct. And I understand too that part of the challenge in the past was creating an engine that was able to use the gas. And I understand that the foremost company in the natural gas trucking is a BC company, Westport. Is that correct? We're not seeing the kind of investment, however, although we do have the leading technology. We're not seeing the type of investment you said that is going to be necessary. And I'm wondering why that is. Why, maybe you can tell us. Now, I understand that there have been some federal funds that have been allocated towards the development. Maybe you could talk about that and then tell us why you think that we're not seeing the same investment. Then the second question is, what do you see as the role as an industry? How do you see the role of government in this development of natural gas? And just one final thing too, so that folks understand what we're talking about. It's in order to have a network of trucks moving through the continents, we have to have filling stations. We need to have, and that engulfs a lot of regulations and such. Right. So that's what we're talking about this time.
Yeah, I guess, well, first of all, certainly representing the CNGVA, we'd like to recognize the federal government. You know, we're benefiting now from the Eco Energy for Alternative Fuels program. This is a $3 million 5-year program to build capacity really to help end users change. We've got to have consistent, for instance, whether it's training or codes and standards, consistency across Canada. So this program is leveraging the same amount of money from the industry and has been a great success under Natural Resources Canada's leadership. So thank you very much for that. In terms of the, you know, brought the map, and obviously there's a lot of investment going on in the U.S. that we're not yet seeing in Canada. This is really about scale. You know, we've got a market that's 1/10 of the size. And, of course, we've got a lot more geography. So we know investment's going to flow where the richest opportunities are, and that's exactly what we're seeing in the U.S., where the private sector is targeting the densest trucking corridors to bring this fuel into the market. Definitely a challenge for us sitting in a continental market, because we know it doesn't stop at the border. This is a very integrated market for goods movement in North America. So I think that's a critical concern. In terms of role for government, here we really see, for one, I think very helpful to be working on these capacity building aspects. But secondly, how do we get around this scale issue, particularly as we see the Americans taking a strong lead? I think there the private sector is ready and is investing in infrastructure. We don't see any role for government in infrastructure. Where we do see is government role with helping the end users to invest in these technologies. And in fact, for every dollar the federal government would put toward fleet end users to adopt these lower GHG technologies, industry will invest $5 in infrastructure. And what's key about this, too, is we're at the start of a transformation. It's not just going to affect the on-road trucks. Some of you may have seen the CN Rail announcement. They're now going to demonstrate a locomotive between Edmonton and Fort McMurray. We're starting to see also marine with tighter regulations coming. The question of what's the investment window to support this transformation, it's really right now. And that is really the risk because, of course, I don't know if any of you saw, and I noticed Mr. Bryson isn't in the room for the committee hearing today, but the Irving Oil announced that they're going to offer LNG at 5 of their truck stops. Well, that's great. That's probably about a $10 million investment at existing sites. But the real investment is to produce the LNG to supply those stations. Now there, Irving operates in the Northeast U.S., Maritimes, and Quebec. Where is that investment likely going to go? In the absence of any certainty in Canada, good chance it will go in the U.S. So it's that investment window at the front end as we see this change coming in North America that I think is very critical, why we see a role for government as far as having a national look at this to make sure on a continent-wide basis we've got that level playing field that we need.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Van Kesteren. Thank you. A friendly reminder to our colleagues and witnesses, we don't refer to the presence or absence of a member of Parliament at a committee or in Parliament. Thank you. We'll go now to Ms. Murray for your round. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you.
So on behalf of our critic for finance, I have some questions also to Ms. Milner. I'm from British Columbia, and my understanding is that one of the biggest trucking firms in BC is in the process of converting to natural gas. It's a huge potential future job creator for people in British Columbia. So what were the keys in terms of the policies and measures in the province of British Columbia that is leading to interest and investment there, and that we could learn from in other parts of the country? And secondly, do you see this as a transition strategy to an even lower carbon future? And if so, what is the life cycle of this transition?
Okay, thank you for your question. Yeah, in terms of British Columbia, I think you're referring to Vetter Transport that has a very large project out of Abbotsford. The driver for that particular fleet, they're the largest hauler of raw milk in Canada. And they knew if they could offer their customers a greener service, that could mean more business. And in fact, they have already won a new contract because of that. That said, as an early adopter, they were fortunate they were able to get incentive funding from the local utility to help strip out some of that front-end risk of purchasing the trucks. That was a big driver for them, but certainly the province of British Columbia's policies related to GHG reductions also very important, and they're looking to the future and wanting to be well positioned so that they're not penalized in terms of their environmental impact operating in BC. So definitely lots of leadership there. As far as how we see this transition, you know, we're often asked, well, why would we even look at one fossil fuel when we're already married to another one, which is crude oil for 99% of heavy vehicles? Well, the answer to that is not only is this a lower carbon fossil fuel that can help in the transition by up to about 25%, there is renewable natural gas. This is natural gas that's produced from waste sources. We see, for instance, FortisBC in British Columbia now offers this to their customers. They can have a renewable blend. That renewable natural gas is a near zero emission fuel. In terms of the time frame, that's really at the beginning in North America. You know, there have been a few announcements. The reality is we're probably looking at kind of a 10 to 15-year transition. But the beauty of going down this path with natural gas is when renewables available, it just can be blended in or, in fact, totally displace. So it totally complements without any further change or investment.
So this may be a technical question that doesn't relate to the transportation natural gas industry, but I understand that there's technologies now that can convert coal seams in situ to gas that is scalable, and that there's also technologies for converting crude oil into gas. Are those technologies ones that are potential for more natural gas product that can drive the price down even further in its use as a transportation fuel source?
Yeah, I can't speak to the specific technologies because we do have a focus on the downstream, on the use. But certainly we know that continentally we're now looking at more than a century of supply of natural gas because of some of those kinds of technological changes. I'm not sure about the specific ones you mentioned, though.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Murray, if you like. 1 minute left in your round, if you like.
Has your industry association put together a kind of like a 5-point plan that you're proposing for the federal initiative around this? Because I think it's clear that if one province is doing this, but that's fine if they're delivering milk just in serving an urban area from the local producers, but what's really needed is that these vehicles can refuel and can serve customers right across the country.
Yes, we do have a plan, and to contrast it with what we've seen with Vetter, that's a single project, they've got a private station. The reality is most fleets in Canada won't be able to do that. They have a challenge with access to the fuel. Mm-hmm. So in that regard, our plan focuses on federal investment to help the end user buy the technology, industry investment to build out infrastructure, and that was that 1 to 5 ratio that I had mentioned earlier.
Okay, thank you. you. Go to Mr. Adler, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for being here today. I just want to start my questioning with Ms. Milner, and I know everybody's going to you, but I think what you're presenting here is really fascinating. And I just want to get some sort of framework to all of this. Now, in terms of cost, the price of liquid natural gas now, is it roughly $3 per million BTU? Is that what it's at around now? Or?
For the commodity itself, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. And to create we have an overabundance of liquid natural gas now, don't we? Not only in Canada, but the U.S. and pretty much around the world. Mm-hmm. And because there's such a huge supply, we're seeing a very low price. Is that correct? Even roughly 20% lower than what we see in Asia, for example.
Yeah, natural gas has historically traded at a discount to oil, but it used to be that they would track. Now the analysts think because of this supply chain in North America, it's uncoupled. Okay. And that's why we're starting to hear major vehicle manufacturers like Caterpillar, for instance, now saying, we're going to go, we see this really as the future, and we're investing to bring now natural gas products for mine haul trucks, off-road. It's not there yet for the real heavy equipment, but we're hearing these kinds of announcements because they're looking at that supply outlook and really repositioning strategy-wise.
Okay, now, in the U.S., the U.S. exports liquid natural gas. Do we here in Canada?
No, we do not.
We don't have the facility to do so, right? The Americans
That's right.
We do?
No, we don't. Okay. We only have an import facility in St. John, New Brunswick, which is pretty much idle.
And the Americans just have one also, right?
I'm not certain.
Okay.
Yes.
So with a deflated price, the manufacturers would like a deflated price. If we begin exporting, and is that a possibility that we could export natural gas at some point in the future?
British Columbia, hope so, yeah.
Okay, so the price could go up.
Right.
So is that not a problem then for us now investing so much into a liquid natural gas infrastructure and getting everyone on board, where in the future that price could go up, which would lead to higher costs for manufacturing sectors? And not a conflict between, are the two lines crossing between the ones who want to export liquid natural gas and those manufacturers that would depend on cheap natural gas and those who are building the infrastructure for cheap natural gas? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a good question because obviously these are commodities that are subject to market factors, right? That said, across North America, a lot of the drilling rigs are being laid down because they can't get enough money for their product. They would love to have that dilemma of growing demand, whether it's offshore or continentally. Okay. I think the other thing is we have to go back to that point I made about differential. At the end of the day, for natural gas to succeed, provided there's a differential with oil, then that will be sufficient to move it forward. And we do think with this uncoupling, we've got this continental resource, 100-plus years, up against oil, which is a global commodity, very volatile, and certainly got its whole share of risks. Okay. Nobody can predict the future, but that said, with this sort of a resource base, and the other thing in Canada we've got to remember is that while we've got more of this stuff, so do the Americans. Right. Our exports are declining precipitously. Okay. By 2035, the National Energy Board thinks they'll be down about 60% to the U.S. Okay. And we export half our gas right now. So we've got a challenge with markets for this resource.
Okay. Hydraulic fracturing. The environmentalists are, against it. Is that a problem here in Canada? Because I know it is in the U.S. It's somewhat of and it's causing some issues for Obama in terms of his base. But is it an issue here in Canada?
The Americans are probably about 8 or 9 years ahead of Canada on using that technique to extract gas. Okay. In Canada, of course, we've certainly heard in different jurisdictions, and it's been challenging because this resource is underground in areas that have never had mining or extraction activities. So there's been a lot of unevenness, need to catch up. Okay. You look to Alberta, and there the Conservation Resources Board will tell you this technique's been used for about 6 decades, and safely, without contaminating or any issues. That said, though, obviously there's a lot of public education to be done, and industry really has to get on that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Adler, we'll go to Ms. Nash, please.
Thank you very much, and hello to all the witnesses. Thank you for being here. Ms. Milner, I do have to ask you a question. I appreciate your presentation, and I just wanted to ask you, we have a sizable bus industry here in Canada, bus manufacturing, the truck industry, some of it's, we've lost quite a bit of it, but could you tell me, is there any work going on with the domestic bus industry in terms of this transition, and what does that mean in terms of innovation and job creation here in Canada? Because I think what you're talking about is interesting technology. I'm especially interested in the renewable aspect of it, although I appreciate it's still a work in progress. But I'm interested in what the impact is on the creation of value-added jobs here.
Okay. Yeah, we have, right now in Canada, we've got New Flyer in Winnipeg, of course, Motor Coach Industries, and Nova Bus in Quebec. Of those three, two already offer natural gas product, which for New Flyer, it's a quarter of their sales to the U.S. So it is substantial. Now in Canada, it's been tougher because we invented the technology back in the 80s in Hamilton. We did it there because the air quality was poor. That said, we have the early adopters in our midst, and some of those same people are still working in the transit. So what we really see in transit in Canada, to pull that demand, we've got to see first a transit move, and we think Calgary will be the one there. But that said, even with Calgary, now that they've expressed strong interest, we see Nova Bus in Quebec, they're the last one not to offer natural gas. They are now bringing forward a natural gas prototype. So there's nothing like the customer on the ground asking for it to, again, kind of stimulate that local production. To give you another example, Labrie Environmental is in St. Nicolas, Quebec. They make bodies for garbage trucks. They, too, have quite a good business to primarily California and Texas, selling the natural gas trucks. They've now made their first sales in Canada. They're quite excited about the potential for the Canadian market. I think their employment offhand is about 250 or 300 people, but absolutely, having this product, expanding their product line, it can help with local employment. And we see that, you know, we didn't specifically mention, I think Dave mentioned earlier, Westport and Cummins Westport out of Vancouver. Westport alone they've added about 250 people in the last 18 months, just in Canada, and another 300 internationally. And they sell the heavy engine for the highway tractors. So it has very much been a generator of jobs at the local level. And we see that, as you said, we've lost a lot of our capacity, unfortunately, to assemble heavy trucks. But can we supply components? Absolutely. Yeah, and I think we're well positioned in that space as well.
Yeah, good point. Thank you very much. Ms. Bittman, I wanted to ask you, I noticed in your filling out the questions for the Finance Committee's work, you have talked about the National Research Council and a shift in the focus of investment at the NRC, and I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about that. I'm always concerned about having balance in our research. I think it's important to work with the private sector and to foster innovation, but I also think it's very important to invest in basic research. It's just part of good public policy. Can you comment on that, please?
I'm actually a last-minute replacement for President Corbett of the Institute, and with the indulgence of everyone here, I would prefer that Peter Blyer, he's a policy advisor at the Institute, take that question.
Thanks, Shannon.
You have about 1 minute for a response. There's about 1 minute remaining.
One or less. Our concern is that there's a lot of confusion currently at the NRC, and there has been a trend towards downgrading basic research, certainly, but at the same time, it's more a question of not being clear on what is actually going on. With the restructuring, we have two processes that are sort of crisscrossing here. We have a the Deficit Reduction Action Plan, which is having an impact. And at the same time, we have reorganization that's being driven towards a new model. And it's very unclear to a lot of our members who are there where this is actually going. And there are a lot of concerns. And in many cases, they're feeling like a lot of the baby's being thrown out with the bathwater in a lot of cases. But there's a lot of uncertainty. And this feeling that experts are not actually being consulted as part of the process, which actually applies not just to the NRC, but really to most other science-based departments and where changes are taking place. For example, amongst the vets at CFIA, this concern not only with what the change is, but the fact that the very people who have the scientific knowledge and expertise have not been consulted as part of the process at arriving at change, which, you know, drives a lot of concern.
Okay.
Often legitimate, but not always necessarily.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Nash. We'll go to Mr. Hoback, please.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you all for being here this afternoon. It's great to see you here. Unfortunately, I only get 5 minutes to ask questions, so I'm going to just kind of stick to one constituent. So I'm going to actually talk to you, Mr. Van Enkom, grain farmer Ontario. I'm a grain farmer from Saskatchewan. That's one thing I know about farmers. You take them anywhere in the world, and you say you're a farmer, and you've got a best friend. It doesn't matter where you are. So. And you made some really interesting points in your opening comments, which I find something that I think we should be listening to and talking about for sure. I noticed your disappointment in AgriStability and AgriInvest and the changes there. We'll highlight the fact that AgriInvest now, farmers can actually invest more in their accounts on a yearly basis. So even though it's gone from 1.5% to 1%, they can actually put more in and have it matching. So I think that's a positive. And I think we have to also highlight the fact that AgriStability is a joint program with the provinces. So any changes to that program wouldn't have been just the federal government. It actually was 8 provinces in conjunction making the recommendations for the changes. And I think it came down to the fact that we've had such great years in the grain sector across Canada that the margins these guys have now are so high that if there was ever a trigger of a payment, a huge payment, we'd be paying farmers who are still making money, more money on top of that. And I think taxpayers would have trouble with that. So I think that justifies some of the changes. But one thing that is happening with those changes is it's freeing up cash to go into the research side of things. And I know in Ontario you've talked about the winter wheat production and the cereal production. Can you just highlight what you'd like to see as far as moving forward, as far as research in the winter wheat and the grain sector, that maybe something we can support you with or help you with there?
Certainly, and thank you for the question. We are excited about the opportunities within the freeing up of those dollars to invest in some strategic investments in the research area. It's important to understand that I think one of the keys to a farmer to maximize his productivity and competitiveness is having the access to first-class, high-yielding varieties to grow that are adapted to his region, to my climate. And we've seen time and again where plant breeding efforts to develop a plant as complex as wheat is, that are not conducted in the region that the variety is intended for have not proven very fruitful. Over the years.
So that would be one of your priorities if you're looking at research for Ontario farmers. You'd like to see that as one of the priorities for that region.
Very much so. A dedicated plant breeder position, wheat breeder, to develop wheat varieties for our Ontario climate, to help support our domestic milling industry also.
Okay. Now on the trade side, I know the Ag Minister has been very involved around the world on the beef side, promoting trade, and I know on the grain side. I also know that the CFIA has been very helpful when it comes to the canola sector and the bean sector in dealing with non-tariff trade barriers when we see barriers going up in different markets around the world. How important is international trade to you guys, and any advice you'd give us on that as we move forward?
Well, certainly we are very appreciative of the Minister's efforts to improve market access around the globe. Improving market access helps increase demand for the products that we have gotten so good at producing here in Canada, and that's an important step. Specifically to the members that I represent, soybean exports are a large factor for us. We export well over 40% of our soybeans out of Ontario, export them to some very high value markets with a food grade type of soybean to Japan and other Pacific Rim countries. So continuing to gain that access certainly helps our competitiveness on those crops.
I think that's the same thing you'll hear producers right across Canada saying the same thing. Again, Canada is an exporting nation when it comes to agriculture goods, and we need market access. And it doesn't matter which grain group or farm organization that comes forward, they'll all say the same thing. You also talked about program equities between provinces. And I noticed that's an issue that's come up in the Ag Committee, which I also sit on. And it's really hard for us on the federal side to address that because different provincial governments have different priorities when it comes to the ag sector. So, for example, the Ontario government may not view the ag sector in the same highlight as the Quebec government, for example.
Yep.
Can you comment on that and how we should maybe try to, is there something federally we can do
Very briefly, sir. Yeah.
Certainly, and very specific to this issue of winter wheat breeding, what we find is that Ag Canada carries 7 full-time breeding positions developing varieties for Western Canada, where at this time we're looking at 1 position in Eastern Canada on the chopping block. So, and just the uniqueness of the growing conditions within this vast country of ours, that's the kind of equity we're referring to.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Investment.
Thank you, Mr. Hoback. We'll go to Mr. Marston, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome. I'm pleased to hear there's quite a dialogue going on here. Ms. Bittman, if I've Bintman, am I close?
Bittman.
Well, I'll get there eventually. I'll work on it. You know, listening to your presentation, and one of my beliefs, and I think Canadians as a whole, is that they believe the federal government's primary role, is delivering particular services that have been in place for a long time. Obviously, Canada Pension Plan, old age security, and of course, employment insurance is one of the more prominent ones that come to mind. In our offices, we get a lot of questions, and people come in with concerns about immigration cases and all kinds of spillover. As the cuts are happening and things are starting to change, we're seeing a higher volume coming in. Now, I've been told, and this is a rumor, I want to stress that the government's giving consideration to closing 100 of 120 Service Canada centres. And that when we question the minister in the House, the kind of response we get is, well, you know, people will be able to access their EI through the internet and that. Now, my experience, and I presume yours might be the same, is most people wind up in a position of being on EI in the first place. One of the first things to go is their internet connection. I'm just wondering if you could respond to what you may know about or potential suggestions of the closure of those offices.
Actually, with respect to the closure of the service centres, it more directly impacts one of our sister unions, PSAC, since our union primarily represents professionals. Having said that, the closure of these offices is coming at a time when, you know, Canadians need it most. And it's, from what I've heard from talking to my counterparts at the other unions, it's creating long delays in the time at which unemployed Canadians receive paychecks, trying to resolve problems relating to those issues. So again, it's another service that Canadians can ill afford to lose at this point in time with all the other job cuts going on.
Okay, thank you. Well, Ms. Milner, I'm going to be like everybody else. I'm going to come back to you because what you're talking about is fairly exciting, and of course the disparity between what we have available in Canada and on that map is very, very significant. In this place, we've spoken across here several times, many times, about the infrastructure deficit that was identified by the municipalities, and that there needs to be a redevelopment. And we've talked as well about the low interest rate climate that we have, that it's a time for Canada to get 10-year bonds to lever money into infrastructure redevelopment and that. But along with that, if you're changing roads, if you're doing these things, it would strike me that the potential for changing the infrastructure for the delivery of natural gas might be something that would go along with that. I wonder what you would think of that.
Could I just clarify your question? So in terms of the intersection with the municipal infrastructure needs, is that...
Well, I'm talking the broader needs
more
of the
broadly,
country, because
across
you've got
Canada.
roads, bridges, a lot of things. If you're redeveloping a road and
Right.
you redevelop an access off that road to a place that could provide your services to it,
okay.
that's where my thinking is.
Okay. We kind of see the infrastructure where the industry is focused on two levels. One is bringing the fuel of the vehicle, and the best way to do that is to graft it onto the existing. That's exactly what Shell will do in Alberta. They'll add it at their Flying J stations. There'll be the diesel pump. There'll be the LNG pump. Make it easy.
That's exactly
right?
my point
The
in
other
the sense
side,
of doing
sorry.
it together.
Right.
Levering the dollars to do one, but
Definitely.
attach the other to it, and you've got the jobs.
Yeah, yeah. The other aspect, though, is the bigger investment in actually producing the fuel. While Canada has a very extensive natural gas distribution infrastructure, pipe network in the ground, we don't have a lot of liquefaction plants. That's a gap area, and that's why we really see the window is right now, because we know, the Irving announcement today, other announcements to feed Ontario and Quebec. We know that border is right there, and it'd be very easy to locate these plants. And just to give you an idea, the Shell plant in Alberta, that was $250 million.
Well, there's an opportunity for farmers to transfer over to this as well if they had the supply available to them.
It would have
combines, tractors.
at the local level for sure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Marston. We'll go to Mr. Jean, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will, my questions will again be for Ms. Milner. You convinced me 5 or 6 years ago on this argument, and I see that the United States is moving forward very quickly. I'm quite surprised, but glad to see the information. I guess my question would be this: if I didn't have any money to invest in this, but I had the ability to be a tax authority and offer credits or something like that, you've got two asks. You need two things. You need to change the trucks over to be able to accept this product, and you need to have a distribution network along corridors of high importance. And you're nodding your head, you're agreeing with everything I'm saying. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. So what would you ask for if you could only receive a tax credit, or your members could only receive tax credits, or Shell, or et cetera? What would you ask for there?
Yeah, we have in the past brought forward a very specific recommendation on a tax credit. Now, again, it's not for the industry I represent. It's for the fleets. It's for the end user to help lower that upfront risk of buying the technology. Because this is not a retrofit technology. It's a buy new. So when they retire an old truck, replace it with one of these. We are very interested in working with the government, really on a partnership to figure out what's the best measure to go along with this private sector investment in the corridor infrastructure, and to create that certainty to attract the investment to Canada and not on the other side of the border.
Now, as far as you're working with the department now to draft some form of non-financial contribution by the government, or?
We're really looking for a discussion behind closed doors on what's the best approach and what is the most palatable approach to the government. Certainly we know that a program option is one way to go with this. The goal here is really to look at the end user and what's going to drive that change and support them in that investment. And tax measure could very well be. So
your opinion is that if you drive the end user, the service delivery will happen on corridors such as the Windsor, Toronto, Montreal corridor?
Absolutely. And we've seen that already. We know with the larger one-off users like Vetter in BC or Robert in Quebec, at the right scale, which is typically the entry point's about 20 trucks, the all-in cost, including the station, is lower than diesel. We know that now. The challenge is, how do we get the user from 0 to 20? Fortunately, we've had these two leaders in the East and the West, and with some support too. In Quebec, it was the province had a measure, accelerated capital. So we knew we need something to help the end users get over that initial barrier.
Okay, great. And I understand as well there's a bus manufacturer in Quebec that manufactures, I think, so far about 800 buses that are used in the oil sands, particularly in Fort McMurray, which is my riding. Well, is that Prevost that does that? Which company is that, do you know?
That's probably Prevost, which I think is a division of Daimler.
And do they have this kind of technology, or are they working on it because of the transportation?
In Europe, yes. In Canada, not yet, but we've got the first coach bus manufacturer, MCI, in Winnipeg now offering, so it's probably a matter of time, particularly with the U.S. market growth.
Thank you very much.
2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My next question is in relation to the Prospectors and Developers Association. In particular, what is happening with the companies that you represent. Obviously, they have a dramatic impact on our gross domestic product. They also have a dramatic impact on our trade, because my understanding is that there are more Canadian companies that own and operate abroad than there are foreign companies operating in Canada by much higher margins. So we are a success story in the world. And I'm wondering, your ask is in relation to making the exploration tax credit permanent. Is that correct? The 15%?
Yes.
Now, what would be the consequences on employment, TSX, share prices, etc., if that was made permanent but was at a lesser percent, for instance, around 10%? Would there be a dramatic impact on the industry?
About 30 seconds.
Yeah. So just as a point of clarification for the members who aren't familiar, the METC only provides a credit for exploration activity within Canada, so it won't impact those other companies that are operating outside Canada. In terms of its significance, really what it is, it's looking at the impact of the after-tax cost to an investor. So it's really trying to, it's the Canadian government sharing part of the risk in that deal. And it should be noted that the 15% is taxable, so after tax it's really like 8%, probably slightly less. So
would there be significant consequences?
Okay. Unfortunately, just very briefly, we are out of time for Mr. Jean, but if you want to just address that briefly, Mr. King.
I think the reality is that it would impact the investment. Would it be significant to deter? I would suspect not.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Monsieur Maïs, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Bidman, in the question job creation, you start with job creation in Canada should not begin with job loss. You say that with the cuts that the government has put forward, we'll lose about 40,000 positions in the private sector. That's on top of the 19,200 positions in the public sector. So, also, you mentioned that there are some issues with respect to the cuts that were made, and that will have an effect on safety, for instance, in terms of regulating bodies that take care of. You talk about food safety, environmental assessment, safe transportation infrastructure. So, can you tell us a bit more in terms of the impact that those cuts might have?
Okay. Bottom line with this government's deficit action reduction plan, it's literally indiscriminate job cuts right across federal departments and agencies. So it's not looking carefully at where the cuts should be made. The Institute has on many occasions offered to work with the government to identify efficiency, and as of this date, we've still had no take-up on our offer. The Institute is obviously would not have issue for the government finding efficiencies, but what we do take issue with is just arbitrary cuts for that basically put Canadians' health and safety at risk. You know, we're all aware of examples where Canadians have died because the regulatory system hasn't worked well. More job cuts obviously impact Canadians' health and safety.
Are you now aware of all the cuts that will be done, or not yet? And where do you think it will affect Canadian safety in terms of cuts? You know, because you have propositions. Apparently, the government's not listening. But where do you feel that we might be most affected in terms of?
Bottom line, the government is being very secretive with respect to where the job cuts are happening, to the extent that we haven't been consulted and we haven't been able to offer our input in order to mitigate the impact to Canadians. Even the Parliamentary Budgetary Officer, Kevin Page, recently threatened to take the government to court in order to make the government more open and transparent with respect to where the job cuts will be. Quite frankly, our hands are tied because we're not being consulted.
Do you also feel that maybe in terms of environment assessment and where, obviously when we think about the future, we think about protecting our children and think about the environment, do you think that also will be affected with either the cuts or how the government has gone forward with the budget?
The environmental cuts to Environment Canada, our members have been very hard hit in that area, and when obviously to the extent that our members' jobs are being cut, services to Canadians are being cut, and that obviously puts at risk future generations of Canadians.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Milner, I'll go quickly because I don't have a lot of time. You mentioned in your brief or in the response that the government should recognize the importance of emerging green energy industries that will play a important role in transitioning the economy to a lower carbon future. What has been done or what hasn't been done? What do you recommend that the government does more on that front?
I think to date, this is one of the challenges we see on alternative fuels. And you look back 20 years of government spending, energy use in transportation, it's more than 95% crude oil. So we may read a lot about electric vehicles and fuel cell and other options, but at the end of the day, it's tremendously tough to get these things into the market. I think with natural gas, this particular option just happens to be at the intersection of a few things. One is that supply chain I mentioned. The other thing that's coming that will favor this and makes the investment right now, the right window for the private sector, are regulations in marine.
Okay.
So tighter regulations in 2015 and 2016. Again, there'll be 3 compliance options there, and that will be an issue both for the Great Lakes and the East and West Coast. Natural gas can already meet the requirements, plus provide a GHG benefit. So this is the other thing that industry is looking at to say, look, it's not just one part of the market. Now that sort of the pieces are starting to fit together more effectively, but very tough task.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Myatt. We'll go to Ms. McLeod, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I too would like to thank all the presenters, but I'll start by picking up where Mr. Jean left off and talking a little bit about the mining exploration tax credit. So, of course, introduced in 2000, it was renewed. And, I think it looks like it costs the Treasury about $100 million a year. So give me your best argument you can in terms of why you would see that we should move forward in terms of renewing it again for next year.
Perhaps the easiest place to do that would be just to look at where it has been successful. So if we think that if you take there'll be a couple of Inuit bands in Newfoundland and Labrador that will have received checks in excess of $100 million just this last year as a result of the Voisey's Bay discovery. If I take Baffinland, that entire iron ore discovery was primarily funded through flow-through shares and the METC tax credits. Our whole diamond industry came from that. So when the government says it costs us $100 million, I think it should really look to say, what is the return on the investment that it's got? And it has been a significant investment in our remotest regions where our Aboriginals are impacted the most. It has paid off. There is a reason that we are #1 mining country in the world.
And can you help me understand a little bit in terms of from the exploration and the people that are sort of enjoying the benefits of the credit, how much successful exploration is, how long does it then take to move a project through to actually, putting ore onto trucks or rail?
So to be honest, the actual stage of exploration, because you're going to have your grassroots exploration type of deal, then you're going to get to pre-feasibility studies. I would have thought that it is not unlikely that it would take at least 7 years to basically determine up that you had a reserve to basically bring it into production. So it's 7 years and probably another 2 to 3 years to actually develop the mine and bring it into production.
So I think if we are looking at the 2000 being the start time, we're probably now just starting to maybe see some of the benefits from that increased exploration.
Well, some of those, and again, that was a broad industry. As I say, your diamond industry was in fact created through, it was found through the flow-through share mechanisms. And so that's up and running and contributing significant dollars. There have been success stories as we've gone along. But as I say, it really depends upon the region. If you take all of Plan Nord, where Quebec's big region is, a lot of those mines that they're hoping to bring into production were in fact discovered through exploration programs.
Okay. And one of the other areas that we were focusing on within this pre-budget consultation is some of the demographic challenges, training challenges. Can you speak to that issue at all in your industry and what you see some of the solutions?
And where we see the issues is, in our side, we're looking at the exploration side, you're looking at your geologists and basically the whole engineering side. So what you have is you have a very experienced group that is slowly moving on type of deal, and it's trying to build those additional resources. Mercifully, a lot of the major mines have focused on this, and they're trying to bring in training programs as well as assisting our schools in opening opportunities. But that is a big issue for the mining industry, not only in Canada but around the world.
Over a minute.
Okay. Have you found that there are any of the programs that have been offered that are providing support for the rural remote communities in terms of assisting with the manpower issues?
A lot of those programs are in fact actually have to be funded by the companies themselves, and so they have developed training programs. What's happening is the various associations are trying to bring standard programs that can be used by these various industries to help develop the skills of the Aboriginal people. Ordinarily, in terms of developing a mine in a region where they have the Indian bands and the Aboriginals, one of the requirements is, in fact, the percentage of employment that would be made up of representatives from those communities. And so training is a massive issue for them. And as I say, each of the companies are recognizing this and developing programs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Ms. Glover, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the witnesses as well for being here. As I listen to the panel, I hear lots of different ideas for Budget 2013. I have to admit I was quite surprised, Ms. Bidman, and actually quite disappointed that you would come and use this as an open mic without even having read the submission submitted by your organization. Nevertheless, I'm going to try to put all of that aside, because Canada faces some pretty tough times. We are still faced with a fragile economy. We remain very, very tepid as far as moving forward. However, Canada is doing better than most countries. As a result, we're looking towards Budget 2013 to try to continue job growth, prosperity over long term, and of course growth in the economy. And so I would ask Ms. Milner, perhaps you could tell me, how do you feel about balancing the budget, and do you have any ideas for cost-neutral regulation changes or anything in your industry for Budget 2013 that might help us to ensure that we don't fall behind?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. We've certainly taken the approach to look at return and return to Canada in a much broader context, which is competitiveness. The threat of having a truck with a much lower operating cost is very real, particularly with the shared border and with where most of our population is. We have, the whole idea of structuring something that is cost neutral to government. This is something the industry would be open to. I mean, we've certainly discussed the concept, could you put a levy on the fuel, for instance, that pays for the end user to help lower that barrier? That absolutely would not be off the table. Okay. The real point here today is to underscore the urgency to do something.
Yeah, and I appreciate
because we're going to lose the major investments otherwise in Canada.
Yeah. And I appreciate that. Actually, your presentation last year, too, is very, very powerful. And that's why I give the opportunity to some of our presenters to also think outside of what has been presented. But balanced budgets, do you think that's an important thing that we should continue to work towards?
Absolutely, and I think what we're proposing is very much in the vein of Canada's Economic Action Plan. This is just very focused on a sector that tends not to get much attention, and where you see the reinforcement is actually on cost of goods delivery. I mean, I don't have my colleagues with Canadian Trucking Alliance here today, but they would be the first to tell you that not only is fuel their #1 cost, it has escalated tremendously. If we think there's no cost to the Canadian economy from that, I think we're fooling ourselves.
Very good. I'd ask Mr. King as well, do you have, aside from the proposals that you've made today, which were very interesting, and I've read your submission and appreciated it, any cost-neutral ideas that might help us, as I say, to move forward and make things easier in your sector?
Again, I consider the METC to be, it actually helps us make jobs and develops it, so it is a payback. I think it is wrong to think of it as a cost to the government. I think if we looked at the return that the government has got, it is not a cost to the government. So if we want to be #1 in mining, we got to be there.
How important is it to return to balanced budgets?
It's always important for Canada in terms of how it stands in the global market type of deal. As I say, I understand the issues, and I understand, but what you're talking about is investing. So the issue is, it's kind of like if I don't invest today, it's not like I can replace it tomorrow. It is a long-term game, and you have to keep the markets going. And so the issue is going to be it's not something you can turn the tap on and off on.
Sure. Appreciate that. I have to say, on behalf of the government, it was a very difficult decision that was made when we instituted the Deficit Reduction Action Plan. It was a very, very tough round of many meetings. It is not easy to see job losses, but in the interest of Canada, we did what we felt was best to reduce the back office in many of these ministries. And I would say that it is just absolutely misleading to suggest that the government didn't spend the hundreds of hours, thank you, the hundreds of hours of time that were dedicated to reviewing the Deficit Reduction Action Plan, reviewing every ministry, and actually hiring an outside agency to give us the advice that was provided. And I can assure you the government took this very seriously, and we still believe that we did what was in the interest of Canadians and of our country. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Glover. We'll go to Ms. Nash, brief round, and then the chair will wrap up with a few questions.
Thanks very much. Ms. Bigman, I just want to ask you a supplementary question. And first of all, thank you so much for being here. And you should, of course, feel free to say whatever is your perspective. And this is a democratic parliamentary committee, and feel free to give whatever testimony you want. I want to pick up on the issue about outside consultants, and the outside consultants that my colleague was referring to cost Canadians something in the order of $20 million, and I understand much of the expertise is in fact already contained in our civil service for many of the services that we're going outside of government to provide. At the same time, we're laying off the expertise that we have within our public service. I wonder if you can just give me your opinion about what this says about public administration, because I think what Canadians expect is that their tax dollars are well spent and we're providing good public administration. Can you comment on that, please?
Okay. Actually, I believe the cost of the government study was $90 billion, not 20.
90 million, not 20
not
million.
20.
Thank you for the correction.
Deloitte and Touche. Our position was that it was unnecessary dollars being spent that cost taxpayers, because quite frankly, the expertise is in-house to properly evaluate programs and to look for efficiencies, and instead this government chose to go outside. The government is spending a lot of money, roughly $6 or $7 billion a year, on contracting out of IT services, again, where we have the expertise in-house, and it would actually be a savings to Canadians. The government's implemented Shared Services Canada, and again, based on studies that the government has done, contracted out Pricewaterhouse to Track 2 study, it's looking more and more like the government is looking to outsource services to Canadians where the expertise is already available in-house, where our members could provide the services to Canadians at a lower cost model through nonprofit. So,
okay. Thank you, Ms. Nash. I'm just going to finish. I do want to thank all the witnesses. Mr. King, perhaps a comment. I want to thank you very much for pointing out the linkage between the important sector that you represent and the financial services sector. I was at your last annual conference in Toronto, which I believe is the largest mining conference in the world, which is incredibly impressive. So I do appreciate the fact that you're linking these sectors, because a lot of times in Canada we tend to put sectors into silos, and that's not in fact how the economy works. So I do appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
I just want to return to Ms. Bittman. In your presentation, you talk about Moody's and Fitch criticizing Canada's budget cuts, and you recognize them as the world's two leading rating firms. Can you just tell me what's the highest credit rating a country can obtain?
Actually, I can't provide that information at this time.
Okay, well, it's AAA. What credit rating does Moody's give to Canada? It's AAA. It's the highest. What credit rating does Fitch give to Canada? It's AAA.
AAA.
It's the highest. I'll just maybe read from the Fitch report. Fitch affirms AAA sovereign rating for Canada. Fitch Ratings has affirmed its AAA sovereign rating for Canada, noting that the government has demonstrated fiscal responsibility and has a plan to further reduce debt. The rating agency affirmed its rating on Canada with a stable outlook, saying that the ratings are supported by Canada's institutional and structural strengths, which are in turn underpinned by effective policies and a history of macroeconomic and social stability. It also talks about, given the Conservative majority, which was awarded to a government running on a platform of fiscal austerity, Fitch expects Canada's fiscal conservatism to continue. It also says that gross general government debt is expected to decline as fiscal consolidation proceeds and GDP growth remains steady. So I think it's important to get on the record what Fitch and Moody's and Standard & Poor's is actually saying about Canada and the government. I do want to turn, however, to, you were very critical in your presentation about our government's approach to science. So let me just read from another document. This is the Association of Universities and Colleges of Canada. Canada's universities welcome the smart strategic investments in research and innovation contained in today's federal budget. In the face of tough fiscal choices, the government showed leadership by continuing its investments in research, innovation, research infrastructure, and university-private sector collaboration, says the chair of AUCC Board of Directors and president of UBC, Stephen Toop. These investments will build a stronger future for our society and economy. In a climate where federal government departments are seeing reductions, the federal budget provides ongoing funding for research and innovation through SERC, CIHR, and CERC to enhance their support of industry academic research partnership programs. It talks about additional $500 million over 5 years for the Canada Foundation for Innovation. It talks about investments in Genome Canada, Canary, investments in McMaster and the lovely city of Hamilton. You know, is the AUCC, I mean, do you want to comment on the AUCC's comment on the last federal budget? Because it is saying exactly the opposite of what you're saying here today.
Again, as I was last-minute replacement for President Corbett, and science is not my portfolio, I would prefer to defer the question.
Okay, well, Mr. Blyer, if you want to answer, but this...
Absolutely. First of all, I think with regard to the rating agencies, the point was that these rating agencies were implying that some of the extreme nature of where the government was going was unnecessary, given what they had a relatively positive assessment of the circumstances in Canada. There was a news report.
I just read to you what Fitch said.
They said that, and they said this as well. There is no doubt that they're generally very pleased with your government and the direction your government's heading in. There's no doubt about that. What they were identifying was the fact that it was unnecessary to go to the point that you were intending to go. Now, on your next question around the science situation and where the university community may very well be at, as you know, there are a number of major programs that fund the sciences in this country, including university sciences, the major projects funding, as well as issues around NSERC. And some of what you're quoting there are positions that are clearly there are difficulties for many organizations. You're our employer, our member's employer. That's a difficult relationship. You're also the major funder for these organizations, and we're all trying to ensure that the resources are there to have the things done that we believe need to be done on behalf of Canadians.
Sorry, point of order, Mr. Jean.
I was just wondering if, Mr. Blyer, I agree with you. I have not seen those particular comments be substantiated with text, and I would like to have that tabled by Mr. Blyer.
Okay, I don't know if that's a point of order, but
I'm not sure which comments you're referring to.
In the future, he can pass it to the committee. Otherwise, his
Moody and
evidence
Fitch,
is quite
is that what
frankly.
you're- Moody and Fitch, we'll provide you with that.
Okay, well,
but with regard to where the general scientific community is at, there is no doubt that there is an issue around how much funding and support there is for intramural science. A lot of major scientific projects in this country require the participation of the private sector, absolutely. Require the participation of universities, most certainly. But they also require ongoing, long-term major project funding, some of which has to be done through intramural science.
One final question
that is
for
the
you.
issue.
In what fiscal year has the Government of Canada, any Government of Canada, provided more public support for research and development in this country?
In what fiscal?
Yeah. Because the most recent fiscal year is the highest in terms of public support from the federal government for research and development.
The trend line in terms of public support for intramural science is a downward trend. We are heading towards the bottom of the OECD tables in that regard, and there's a clear sense from all the partners in the scientific community.
Sorry, point of order, Ms. Glover.
Before PIPSIC embarrasses themselves any further, I have to correct the record. The $20 million that was suggested by Ms. Nash and then corrected by Ms. Bittman. It's a point of order because it's not 90 million. That's a fictitious number, just like the rest of what was said.
But these are points
It's
of
20
debate.
million.
These are points of debate, and they may be valid points of debate. Anyways, I'm over my time, so I'm going to have to. But I'm welcome to continue this debate, and we can receive further information. But I do want to thank all of you for being here today. I want to thank the colleagues for a wonderful debate. We will bring the next panel forward immediately after. Thank you. Okay, I call this meeting back to order, the 78th meeting of the Standing Committee on Finance. I want to welcome our second panel here today. We have first organization, Big Brothers Big Sisters of Canada. We have the Canadian Construction Association. We have the Canadian Nurses Association. We have Eco Justice Canada. Et finalement, la Fédération de la...
And finally, we have the Fédération de la Relève Agricole du Québec. So welcome to our committee. You each have 5 minutes for your presentation, after which...
We'll start with Mr. McDonald for your presentation and work our way down the table.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to share our thoughts with you today. As part of a vibrant nonprofit sector, which represents 11.1% of Canada's workforce, and whose $106 billion in economic activity counts for 7.1% of GDP, Big Brothers Big Sisters is an organization on the ground providing direct service to over 36,000 children and youth each year. Our 122 local Big Brother Big Sister agencies have been serving Canadian children and families for a very long time. In fact, we're less than 100 days away from celebrating the beginning of our 100th anniversary. As you can appreciate, a healthy and thriving economy is critical to the sponsorship and donating climate in which charities such as ours exist. With a vision of every child in Canada who needs a mentor has a mentor, we have big dreams, and we'll need to maximize both traditional and non-traditional sources of sustainable funding and fundraising. For our part, Big Brothers Big Sisters is looking at developing new sources of funding that not only provide long-term revenues, but also contribute to job creation. Having just partnered with the University of Waterloo, we're in the final stages of assessing the feasibility of launching a social enterprise. Tentatively branded as First Mentors Incorporated, this for-profit corporation would secure private sector clients and develop, implement, and monitor mentoring programs to attract and maintain new young employees. The profits from First Mentors would then be channeled back to Big Brothers Big Sisters as a corporate donation. Another area that will be critical for our organization in the future will be the development of a better understanding of the economic climate and forces at play in the world around us, and how the nonprofit sector needs to respond. We're fully supportive of a new initiative by Imagine Canada that will see the creation of a chief economist for the nonprofit sector. When the chief economist begins work in early 2013, he or she will analyze the economic implications of both government-initiated and sector-initiated policy proposals for charities and public benefit nonprofits. Through the work of the chief economist, the charitable and nonprofit sector will inform federal and pan-Canadian public policy in order to create a more supportive environment that will enable charities and public benefit nonprofits to better serve and engage Canadians. As well, the sector's first chief economist will interact with parliamentarians, government officials, other economists and the media to ensure that the impact of the sector is more fully understood. We're also delighted that our organization has become involved in 2 new partnerships with other voluntary sector organizations aimed at providing additional support to northern and remote communities. First, with Dreamcatcher Mentoring, and second, in conjunction with Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada, YMCA Canada, YWCA Canada, and United Way of Canada. If we can positively affect the life trajectory of young people, primarily from Aboriginal and Inuit families, we can work to develop a healthy and sustainable workforce of the future. I've mentioned the notion of partnerships. Being seen as a credible and important partner is essential in today's world. I'd like to draw your attention to a recent Ipsos Reid Trojan One Sport marketing study on the most valuable sponsorship properties in Canada. Big Brothers Big Sisters found itself in 11th position in a pool of 35 causes and properties. We're delighted that our organization was cited as leaders in 2 of the 7 categories that comprise excellence in corporate and government sponsorship, impact of cause, and responsible management. Big Brothers Big Sisters recognizes that it has multiple roles in contributing to a healthy economy. First and foremost, in helping to develop children and youth into the workforce of the future. Second, as an employer of staff across this country. And third, in the development of innovative approaches to organizational growth and sustainability. Finally, as you may be aware, 25 young people from across Canada arrived in Ottawa on Monday to begin our Social Innovators Summit. Each young person is a current or former little brother or little sister. While they share a common background of having a formal mentor in their lives, we are hoping to hear from them about the issues they care about the most and provide them with skills and tools to go back to their communities and initiate a social change project. This summit is fully funded by the private sector, with MasterCard Canada, WestJet, and Roots Canada having stepped up to the plate. Upon the conclusion of this session and after the vote, you're all invited to come down the hall and visit with these dynamic young people, volunteer leaders from Big Brothers Big Sisters, and representatives of other youth-serving organizations. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. MacDonald. We'll go to Mr. Atkinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you and the committee members for providing the Canadian Construction Association with the opportunity to appear before you today. Our association represents the non-residential side of the construction industry. We build Canada's infrastructure. We have an integrated membership structure of some 70 local and provincial associations from coast to coast to coast in Canada, with a membership of just over 17,000 member firms, over 95% of which are small and medium-sized businesses. The construction industry employs just under 1.5 million Canadians, or nearly 10% of Canada's total workforce. Our market, our construction market, is projected by international economic projections to be the 5th largest in the world by 2020, behind only China, the U.S., India, and Japan. Our pre-budget submission addresses the areas of economic recovery, growth, job creation, demographic change, and productivity. With respect to Canada's continued economic recovery and growth, it will probably come as no surprise to you that we continue to emphasize the importance of ensuring that Canada's key critical public infrastructure, its highways, its roads, its bridges, its seaports, its border crossing, its inland trade routes, its water treatment facilities, its water distribution systems, its schools, its hospitals, are not only repaired and restored, but improved and maintained. Why? Because there can be no growth, no economic growth, without a state-of-the-art, well-maintained critical public infrastructure. Because Canada's critical public infrastructure is our national economy's health care plan. And despite the fiscal challenges, we cannot reduce our efforts to rebuild, improve, and maintain our vital infrastructure. We must not repeat the neglect of the past. We very much support the focus of the current Economic Action Plan on economic growth. But economic growth cannot occur without state-of-the-art public infrastructure. The current $33 billion Building Canada plan comes to an end on March 31, 2014. In order to ensure no gap in funding and not to lose a construction season, the new plan's successor long-term infrastructure plan must be part of the next federal budget. We are hopeful that after this summer's consultations with stakeholders around the country on the new federal long-term infrastructure plan, that helped reinforce the importance of ensuring that that plan continues and that we continue our sustained effort to ensure Canada's infrastructure is world-class. From our perspective, the long-term infrastructure plan must be truly long-term, be funded at a level equivalent to the current Building Canada plan, and be flexible enough to meet the changing needs of the diverse regions and participating partners. In addition to the next long-term infrastructure program, we also believe the federal government needs to provide greater support and certainty for municipalities in the maintenance and rebuild of their key municipal infrastructure. To this end, we commend the government for continuing and making permanent the gas tax transfer fund, the $2 billion annually to municipalities. However, we would like to see that indexed so that it is not eroded over the years by inflation. That brings me to my second recommendation, red tape. As an industry, we strongly support the efforts of the government to reduce the regulatory burden on small business, chiefly in areas where provinces or municipalities already have robust regulations, essentially performing a similar function. Signing interjurisdictional agreements to deliver joint services, harmonizing regulations where possible, and creating a single federal provincial service delivery window for small business would all be welcome. Certainly your efforts in this area, in the area of environmental assessment, and indeed the recommendations of the Red Tape Commission are positive movements. With respect to the needs of our workforce of the future and training especially, we very much support the reforms that are being made to our permanent immigration system and also our temporary foreign worker program, and especially measures which will see employers more involved in the process. With that, we commend the recent announcement by the government to bring an expression of interest program for immigration, for skilled worker immigration to Canada. We think that's a very positive step, and we would certainly want to have ensured by this committee that the necessary measures and resources to put that in place are there. With that, Mr. Chairman, I think I will conclude my remarks and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Atkinson. We'll now hear from Ms. Milden, please.
Bonjour, good afternoon. As President of the Canadian Nurses Association, which represents more than 146,000 registered nurses in our country, the largest group of healthcare providers, thank you for this opportunity to present the nursing profession's solutions for a transformed healthcare system that will support and contribute to economic growth. Je vous remercie de me donner de l'occasion de présenter.
I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to have this opportunity to speak to the nursing profession solutions for transformed healthcare that will support and contribute economic growth.
A healthy nation are inextricably linked. To strengthen and grow our economy, we must first tend to the health of our nation and its ability to support this economy. It just makes good financial sense. We are presenting strategies and tools that the federal government can use to achieve better health and a healthier economy. CNA has two key recommendations. First, the federal government should work collaboratively with the Canadian Institute for Health Information, Canada's registered nurses, physicians, and other health providers to select 5 health and health system indicators to focus our efforts upon. The federal government should then convene a consensus conference with these stakeholders, as well as provincial and territorial representatives, to endorse the indicators and commit to having Canada within the top 5 ranking nations on each indicator by 2017. The federal government has the opportunity to set forth a pan-Canadian vision for better health, but it must be built communally, based on consensus from all levels of the government and leaders in healthcare and business. The incentive to act now could not be greater, with direct medical costs in Canada at $200 billion annually and chronic disease estimated to cost the Canadian economy $190 billion every year. This brings me to CNA's second point, the need for policy interventions to support healthy aging. Canada's population over the age of 65 is projected to more than double by the year 2036, bringing it to more than 9 million. More than 40% of Canadians currently report having at least one of 7 chronic conditions. If the current trend continues, Canadians will suffer from several chronic conditions as they age. These further complications, once in place, are costly to treat. And as our seniors age, the broader social determinants of health, such as income, literacy, and employment, have a deeper impact. The Canadian Nurses Association recommends the federal government support healthy aging by expanding federal tax credits and home care benefits to help older Canadians stay in their homes longer, receive the right care at the right time, and remain resilient and independent. In addition to improved quality of life for seniors, Canada's economy could save more than $15,000 per patient per year by moving palliative care patients from costly and scarce acute care beds to robust home care services. For example, as one family recently shared with me in despair, the 4 hours of help they were allocated per week was simply not enough. A system heavy with overburdened hospitals and emergency departments cannot be sustained. The absence of a healthy aging strategy means increased rates of chronic diseases and their related complications, and rising costs on an already overtaxed acute care system. These consequences strain the generations that follow, who put aside their careers, productivity, and personal lives to care for aging family members. it is clear that implementing a healthy aging strategy to support a healthy and productive nation is key to a thriving economy. On behalf of Canada's registered nurses, I thank you and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now hear from Mr. Peterson, please.
Thank you for inviting EcoJustice to this committee meeting. EcoJustice is a group of lawyers in Canada that have been in practice for 20 years with an objective of seeking a healthy environment and using the law as a tool to achieving that. You may say, what does a lawyer have to tell this committee and say on the economy? No, we're not economists, but there are obvious places where the law and the economy do intersect. And I brought two concrete examples that EcoJustice has identified ought to be adopted that at the very least would be cost neutral, if not ultimately affording government savings in the end. And I heard comments earlier as I was in the audience about Canada's fragile economy, and we're certainly cognizant of that and are not, in a position to advocate enormous spending on environmental enforcement, for example, that simply won't happen. So we're trying to be creative and look at ways where we can achieve better outcomes for the environment, enforce and uphold Canada's environmental laws, and end up not putting us in an economic disadvantaged position. So those two ideas, the first one is making environmental law enforcement information readily available to Canadians. This is something that's available in the U.S. It's something that is available piecemeal in Canada. If one wants to know if enforcement action's been taken against a certain polluter, for example, it can often be very hard to get that information. And from a transparency standpoint, I think it's obvious that that's not good for the public not to be able to have that information. But it has deeper consequences that we're aware of. And one of those, for example, is the inability for investors to easily obtain information to find out, for example, when they're doing their due diligence on a facility, ought I buy this entity? That information is not really easy to get right now. It requires access to information requests, which can be costly, time-consuming. It goes into the government bureaucracy, and it's not an ideal way to get that information. So what we're advocating is the creation of a database that would be searchable online, very easy. It would contain the following: inspection information, investigation, warnings, orders, prosecutions, convictions, and penalties. So it would be a comprehensive database that would allow all of the different agencies throughout Canada who engage in environmental law enforcement to put their information there. The obvious cost savings would be this information would no longer be subject to access to information requests. It would simply be available. So we're putting it forward as ultimately a cost-neutral outcome. Beyond that, there's the greater, loftier ideals about democracy and the notion that access to information is democracy in action, more or less. And so I think it's a good thing. No matter what our environmental laws say and what they are, we want to enforce them, whatever's on the books, and this would be an excellent tool to doing so. The second issue is the notion of capped liability for offshore drilling. This is something that's very important to EcoJustice. Right now, our legislative regime caps liability at $40 million for a spill in the Arctic, like the BP offshore Horizon offshore spill. That's very low. In the UK, I believe it's gone up to 125 million, 40 million. To give perspective to this, the BP spill has cost around 40 billion already. So there really is no reason for government to be acting as an insurer for these companies. It creates disincentives for them to enact proper policies and that kind of thing to ensure safety.
1 minute.
So,
1 minute.
Okay. So I'll wrap that up. On that issue, we're not suggesting necessarily that there be no cap on the liability. Obviously, a balance probably ought to be struck. And again, I'm not an economist, but right now it simply does not make sense to have a $40 million cap. And how this ties back to the economy, in my view, is that Canadians will be ultimately holding the bag if a spill happens in the Arctic. And right now, bidding's closed on 195,000 hectares of Arctic Ocean. So this is a new issue. The licenses haven't been really issued that much in the past, and now they are. It's something that's very important to us. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Ensuite, Madame Delomier, est-ce que c'est correct?
Now, Madame Delomier. Good afternoon. I will speak in French, which will be a little bit of a change. My name is Magali Delomier. I'm DG of the Fédération de la Relève Agricole du Québec, or the Federation for the Next Generation of Farmers in Quebec, and I'd like to thank you for inviting me to appear before this committee. This is the first time that we've been invited to appear before this committee. And so I'm very happy to see that you're interested in the next generation of farmers. I'll talk a little bit about our organization. First of all, the Federation is the only spokesperson for the next generation of farmers in Quebec. Over the last 30 years, we've been working to make it easier for young farmers to get established in agriculture. We're trying to make the profession more attractive to youth. We're trying to make more information available and make it easier to get training. We have more than 2,000 members across all of Quebec. They're aged between 16 and 40 years, and they share a passion for agriculture. Their youth are in training, who are getting set up in agriculture, or who are already established in agriculture. So there are 4 key elements to my presentation that I'm going to talk about. First of all is the need for a strong agricultural policy from the federal government. Secondly, we need financial incentives. Third, a transfer savings fund. And the fourth is the renewal of the agreement with the Canadian Young Farmers Forum. So these 4 elements are very important. They will make it easier for youth to get established in agriculture, and they'll make it easier to maintain agriculture across Quebec and across Canada. First of all, we think that there needs to be a strong agricultural policy that supports farmers, and that would be the foundation for other measures. Recent cuts to various support programs under Growing Forward, for example, will hurt youth and will make their situation more precarious. Youth are at a great risk because they are establishing themselves, and they're more sensitive to variations in prices and to climate change. And it has not helped them to have had these cuts to programs. Another major problem that we see in Quebec is that it often costs less to dismantle a farm than it costs to transfer it, because the next generation is not able to buy it at its fair market value. So we need to have incentives for transfers, and we need to have disincentives for dismantling. And so we have a few recommendations for that. Today, transfers of incorporated agricultural businesses to family members are not considered, according to the Income Tax Act, as capital gains, and so they do not benefit from the capital gains exemption. As such, we recommend that businesses sold to a family member be able to benefit from the capital gains exemption. And this, of course, would require a change to the Income Tax Act. In addition to this measure, and in order to encourage transfers instead of dismantling, the capital gains exemption could be increased from $750,000 to $1 million for business transfers. We also recommend the establishment of a savings fund for transfers, something that would resemble RESPs. So parents would contribute to a fund, and that would be complemented by contributions from the provincial and federal government, and that would be given to the next generation when the parents retire. And so we need to incite parents to plan their retirement and the transfer of their business, and that's something that's lacking across Canada. This would also allow the creation of supplementary funds for the retiring family members that would help them meet their needs without dismantling their farm, and it would also, of course, reduce the financial pressure on the next generation. Finally, it's very important to renew the financial agreement between the government and the Canadian Young Farmers Forum. This framework agreement will expire in 2013, and without this funding, this organization would not be able to exist. The forum brings together all young farmers organizations from across Canada. It's existed for the last 15 years, and it's allowed the next generation of farmers to network amongst themselves, to train leaders for the future, and to improve training and share best practices. It is the spokesperson for Canada's young farmers, and it is contributing to the discussions around Growing Forward too. And we need to make sure that support for this organization continues, because right now they are the only professional resource for young farmers at the pan-Canadian level. And in closing, we would like to see the forum renew its efforts in training Canada's next generation, an initiative that was undertaken first by Minister Blackburn in 2009, and it was completely abandoned when that minister left, despite the fact that time and effort had been, money had been put into that. A great deal of work had been gone into the next generation of Canada, and I think that's work that needs to continue, that needs to start again at that forum. Thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to begin with Mr. Atkinson. And I couldn't agree with you more about your comments concerning the importance of investing in infrastructure and how sound infrastructure investment boosts Canada's productivity. Just yesterday at this committee, we had the representative of the Toronto Board of Trade who talked about a $6 billion drag on that region's economy because of the lack of transit infrastructure specifically. So I'd like to hear you speak a little more about the Building Canada Fund. I know you're asking for that to be renewed in this budget, and you'll be happy to know that the Board of Trade in Toronto also called for the indexation of the gas tax. So I'd like you to elaborate on that. I'm someone who's a big transit fan, and I'd like to hear you speak a bit more about the impact on jobs and the impact on the productivity of our economy.
Well, I think it goes without saying that everyone understands how related the state of our highways, our trade routes, etc., are to our economy and to prosperity and for our country, indeed our standard of living when it comes to even our health, when it comes to our drinking water and the environment. And what has pleased us over the last while is that governments, not just the federal government, but at the provincial level and indeed municipal governments, have seen the need to continue to ensure that our public infrastructure is at a state that can provide that. In fact, it's even more important coming out of a recession that Canada is strategically positioned with state-of-the-art infrastructure that can continue to attract foreign investment and continue to ensure that we're competitive in a very competitive marketplace. So it is key, and we're quite frankly encouraged by the position that governments of all stripes, quite frankly, at all levels of government in Canada have shown a real renewed partnership to ensure that, and indeed the private sector as well. There is a role for the private sector as well in ensuring Canada's public infrastructure continues to improve and is maintained. And what's so important about this is having a long-term plan, because the more we have long-term planning, the more we as an industry, and one of Canada's largest, if not the largest industrial employer, we can also plan. We can plan our human resources, our training, what we're going to need to meet that future demand. It makes it so much easier in many other areas as well. So it's absolutely key, and it's not a question of should we, it's a question of when and how committed we are.
Thank you. I completely agree that we need a multi-year plan. We can't just go budget to budget. We need a multi-year plan. And at a time when there is uncertainty because of the global economy, making investments in infrastructure is a way to keep the economy moving and keep us growing until some of the rest of the world catches up. Mr. Peterson, I'd like to ask you, you made a number of recommendations, but I'd like to ask you more specifically about the capping of liability. Can you tell me, after the BP spill, what action the Americans took? Because I could be wrong, but it's my understanding they increased the level of liability because they learned how disastrous a spill can be and how much the liability can be. Can you tell me if that happened?
There's about 1 minute for the answer, Mr. Peters.
Yes, I don't have the answer on that number. It is higher than in Canada, but there has been debate in the U.S. to take it all the way up to unlimited liability. So obviously with a $40 billion tab, there became heightened interest in that issue. As far as I understand, amongst the UK, Canada, and the U.S., Canada has the lowest by far.
We have the lowest. And in terms of when there is an unforeseen and an undesired environmental impact, let's say an oil spill, I guess the impact on the environment is devastating and needs to have focus, but also the impact on business as well.
Okay. Want that to remain a comment or brief comment, Mr. Peterson?
Just following up back before, I do have $75 million as the cap in the U.S. I didn't want to misspeak without seeing this written here.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Nash. Mr. Hoback, please.
Thank you, Chair. And if I have a little bit of time left over, Mr. Jean might take the rest of my time, just to make you aware of that. Ms. Delomar, I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. You made some really interesting perspectives, and the transfer of family farms has always been something that we're always trying to figure out how we can do that more effectively and more efficiently. And you made some good comments about the capital gains exemption, stuff like that, and I understand where you're coming from. And that the capital gains exemption of $750,000 to $1 million, I think is probably in some ways a reasonable request in light of the size of our farms now and the capital that's being involved. One thing that you talked about there, which I thought was really intriguing, though, was the savings account for the next generation. Now, there's been talk in the sector that maybe the Agri-Invest account should be that account, that, as a farm is transferred from one person to the next, that Agri-Invest account should transfer with the farm and not stay with the person who had the farm. And the logic behind that is that the farm entity actually put the money in that Agri-Invest account, so the farm entity should maintain that account as it moves into the next generation. Do you have any input onto that or thought on that?
Est-ce que vous parlez du fonds d'épargne?
Are you talking about the savings fund transfer, or the transfer savings fund? Savings funds transfer. I guess my question is, could the Agri-Invest account that's established now be that venue if it was to stay with the operation instead of the owner of the operation?
J'entendais par fonds d'épargne transfert.
When I talked about the transfer savings fund, I meant a fund that could be Agri-Invest, I'm not sure, but the goal would be to allow the parents to set money aside so that when they retire, they could take advantage of that, but because it would be augmented by funds from the government, that would go up, and there would be an incentive for a transfer. If that, the incentive would be that money from the government would be given to the parents only if there was a transfer within the family and not if the enterprise was dismantled. Just throwing that out there, see if you'd thought through that, of using the Agri-Invest as a tool for maybe doing what you're talking about. And then, of course, the Agri-Stability account, there's talks, what we're seeing out west is that account is being transferred from entity to entity, especially if it's part of a corporation. So we're actually seeing farmers spending money in goodwill to buy up a margin of another corporation. So that if I buy you out, for example, the first thing I want to see is your Agri-Stability margins, and if they're better than mine, then I take on your shares and run your entity. So do you think that the Agri-Stability needs some changes to reflect that also, or?
connais pas assez la technicalité du...
I'm not familiar with all the technicalities of that program, but if it would help young farmers and favorize transfers as opposed to dismantling a farm, then absolutely it's a possibility that could be studied.
Turn the rest of my time over to Mr. Jean now.
Got 1.5 minutes, Mr. Jean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, first of all, in relation to eco-justice, I'd be happy to meet with you at another time, and my iPad unfortunately is not charged, but to go over specifically what Canada has relating to Arctic Waters Prevention Act, Pollution Prevention Act, which we brought into power since government, and the maximum penalties and the insurance liability, et cetera, because recollection, I was on that committee when it was passed along with the Migratory Birds Act, and it's not what you're suggesting, but I'd be happy to meet with you to go over that in particular. My interest is in relation to the Canadian Construction Association in particular. Would you agree, first of all, that this federal government has been in charge of the largest ever investment in infrastructure in Canada's history as far as money goes? It's been the fastest that any government has ever implemented it and paid it out, and it's the most efficient rollout ever as far as the application process, and in fact it's about 5 times what any Liberal government has done before because of the nature of the Economic Action Plan. Would you agree with that, the $45 billion infrastructure plan?
Well, answering that very loaded question, what I will say is that the stimulus program, this stimulus program was rolled out with light speed. And I think, though, it was done so because of the tradition we've had in Canada of the partnerships that have been made with lower levels of government, that we have, if I can use the pun, the infrastructure in place to make sure our co-funded infrastructure programs can work effectively. And we would certainly like to see the kind of administrative ease and
Actually, we are out of time for this round, so unfortunately we'll have to move on. We'll go to Ms. Murray, please, for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So the construction sector is hugely important in British Columbia, of course, and important to small businesses across the country. I just wanted to pick up on your comment about the stimulus program, because when I was out talking to small business people, chambers of commerce and mayors, one of their complaints was that the stimulus program was rolled out in a way that didn't really reflect the core priorities. That it reflected whatever kind of came forward that they could do right away. So one of the requests I heard was about predictability and sustainability of the funding, so all of the strategic plans can kind of dovetail. So is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think it's important to make that distinction, that was a stimulus program, not an infrastructure program. And as a stimulus program, it worked very effectively. What we want to see in terms of a successor program to the Building Canada plan, which is an infrastructure program, is a long-term infrastructure plan. But I think it's important to make that distinction between what was effectively a stimulus program and an infrastructure program, because we all know that we must invest in our critical public infrastructure, not because it creates immediate jobs, which it will. We invest in our public infrastructure because it's, of course, the sanity going forward.
Okay, thank you. And I think that it's fair to say if there were a planned, methodical infrastructure program, then if there was a need to do stimulus, you would just deliver on that plan, and it would be predictable and sustainable. But could I ask Mr. McDonald from Big Brothers? I'm interested in your comments about mentoring, and in your written submission you talked about income inequality. You also talked about the need for First Nations mentoring. So can you tell me a bit more about your organization's experience with what income inequality, where it's going, and I mean, does that link to your concern for First Nations? And then lastly, how do you see that your work as being important preventative work to keeping people out of prisons so we don't have to have a lot more spending and a lot more people in jail?
Yeah, they're both interdependent and independent questions. I mean, first and foremost, our organization has a tendency to serve a lot of kids who come to us with multiple risk factors. So these are kids who are going to be living in poverty now, transient. They may be witnessing family violence or drug and alcohol abuse in the family. And then we've got kids who live in great families as well. One of the things, though, that there's an undeniable correlation is that those kids who come from families that don't value education are not breaking the cycle of poverty and becoming contributing members of society. One of the things we're doing right now is, we've been around for a long time. In January, we'll be announcing the results of a 5-year study that's taken a look at almost 1,000 families that have big brothers and big sisters for the last number of years, or last 5 years, and how they've, in effect, turned out. And one of the things that the early findings are showing that these kids are graduating from high school at a rate 2.5 times a peer group in Canada. That's the first step to going on to post-secondary education and breaking that cycle. In terms of looking at Aboriginal populations, I think one of the biggest learnings that we're having is, are we actually prepared to give up the brand of Big Brothers Big Sisters to make effective inroads in working with Aboriginal populations? Last fall, we piloted a program in Flying Dust First Nations in northern Saskatchewan, and it's a modified in-school mentoring program where high school students are matched with elementary school students in school, but the match itself is paired with an elder for a cultural component. One of the things we learned during the process was that, A, the band council, who we've partnered with, want to make sure the high school students get on to post-secondary so that that economic gap starts to be minimized because they're getting good jobs because they've got an education. But as well, we found out that the program wouldn't work if we called it Big Brothers Big Sisters. So it's actually named in Cree. And I think for organizations like ours, it's a fundamental rethink and shift in terms of how we're going to approach working with not just Aboriginal or First Nations communities, but also new Canadians.
Well, wouldn't it be great if the work that you're doing and that kind of work converts jobs as security in prisons into jobs in small businesses and communities that are hiring
absolutely,
First
the cost
Nations?
benefit's incredible.
Just a brief response. Okay.
Is that my time's up?
Your time is up, actually, yes. Thank you, Ms. Marie. I just wanted to ask for unanimous consent. I'm going to recommend that the committee keep going for another 3 rounds to get in as many members as possible to ask questions before the votes. Okay. Seeing consent, I will move forward with Mr. Adler, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to preface my remarks by saying that I'll be sharing my time with Mr. Jean. So in the very selfless person, the very limited time that I have, I do want to say, Mr. McDonald, your organization is fabulous. Love what you do. You should be very proud of Big Brothers Big Sisters, because I respect what you do so much, and you do some fabulous work, so congratulations. And similarly, Ms. Milden, the nurses are the backbone of our health system, so keep up the good work. Again, nurses are first class. So, Mr. Atkinson, just a few things. I just want you to comment on a couple of things I want to bring up. Environmental assessment, 1 project, 1 review. Good?
Absolutely.
Terrific.
Private sector loves certainty.
Absolutely. And that certainty encourages investment, which creates jobs, which creates long-term prosperity, correct? Fantastic. You're shaking your head, so that means yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Because the transcript doesn't pick up head shakes. Immigration, our reforms to immigration. Aligning it more with labor market demands. Good?
Yes, absolutely. And more employer engagement, even better.
Fantastic. Corporate taxes. We've reduced them to 15%. How has that helped create jobs? How has that helped create investment?
The more money that the company has in-house to reinvest in training and in productivity gains, the better. Our members are all small businesses. Anything you can do to enhance the small business deduction would be extremely helpful in those circumstances to give an incentive for companies to reinvest in their human resources.
Good. So business is good among your members?
Absolutely.
Terrific. Quick question, then I'm going to pass 2 more questions. I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Jean after that. One is, I've been asking all the associations that have been coming in this one question, and so far the tally is 140,000 to 0. Mr. Atkinson, among your members, did any one of them, in knowing that you were coming up here today,
ask you to ask the committee that they should be imposing a $21 billion carbon tax? Yes or no?
No.
No. How many members do you have?
17,000.
17,000? 7-0. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Jean, I'll pass it over to you.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Atkinson, same questions I'm going to continue on with. How do we encourage the private sector to build in places, keeping in mind, I'm from Fort McMurray, keeping in mind the situation that's happening there. It's also happening to my other constituents from Newfoundland, in other areas of the country, especially along the north. How do we do so without putting money into it? Because governments, in my opinion, are not very good at spending money. We've done a great job with the Economic Action Plan, the $45 billion included. But how do we do so? Do we do it through tax incentives? Do we do it through tax credits, maybe a rebate on the GST in certain areas to build residential or commercial to alleviate some of the problems? What would you, in 1 minute, tell me to do?
Just so I understand your question, you're talking about with respect to finding additional funding options for public infrastructure? Or
Not funding, no, I'm talking about the construction to get the private sector into it, like PPPs, like things like that.
I think
how do we do it in particular areas?
One of the things I think we have to do with respect to public-private partnerships is get the transactional costs down. Right now, because they are so expensive to deal with because of the legal agreements, the complexities, etc., you need a minimum threshold of project size or value before it makes any sense. We have to do something about bringing those transactional costs down before they're going to become lucrative for municipalities, for example. Number two, very quickly, one of the constraints Canadian firms have in participating in concessions, particularly where they're foreign-led, is that our balance sheets aren't as healthy as the European contractors, for example, because we've relied on the surety bonding mechanism to leverage our balance sheets by a factor of 15 to 20 times. Surety bonding is unknown in Europe. So when it's a foreign-led concession, particularly from Europe, they demand letters of credit. They will not accept surety bonds. It puts Canadian design-build companies at a disadvantage in those circumstances. So in looking at how you can incent more Canadian homegrown, if you will, P3 participants, look at some of the financing restraints. One last one. Extend EDC's domestic powers. That's a big help to our firms getting involved in those large financing arrangements.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jean, Monsieur Caron, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. J'ai partagé mon temps avec Monsieur Mai. Mr. Caron, I will share my time with Mr. Mai. Madame Delomier, what you were saying is the same things that I've been hearing in my writing. I'm going to ask you 3 questions that are interlinked, and then I'll let Mr. Mai ask his questions. How long have you been working on the recommendations that you've formulated today? What has been the response of the government to your recommendations? And to what extent are these measures necessary to ensure the survival of family farms as opposed to large corporate farms? Well, the different points that I've presented have different scales of application. When we talk about a strong agricultural policy, for example, I don't want to put a date on it, but that's something that we've always been fighting for. And the most recent round of cuts that took place with Growing Forward are going in completely a different direction. In terms of financial measures and the transfer savings fund that I mentioned, well, that's another issue that we've been calling for quite a long time. I think we started talking about it in 2006. The Union of Agricultural Producers brought that up, I believe, at this committee in 2006. As for the forum, the Canadian Young Farmers Forum, well, the agreement will need to be renewed next year, and as such, we felt that it was urgent to talk about the necessity of renewing that funding agreement. As for your other questions, to what extent are the measures that you proposed important? To what extent will they ensure the survival of family farms as compared to large corporate farms? Well, they're absolutely essential because if we allow family businesses to be transferred, we're maintaining a system of family farms. We're allowing farms to be transmitted from one generation to another. And that allows us to sustain the family farm model that we have in Quebec. And up to now, would you feel that the governments have listened to what you've been saying or not? Well, we have made a number of requests. Let's leave it at that.
For you to, is there a difference between cap and trade and carbon tax?
I'm probably not the best person to speak on that as a lawyer.
It's fine. Do you believe in polluter pay?
I think it's a principle that's being widely endorsed throughout much of the world.
Okay.
In the legal system.
I see in your report from your website that you find that there's chronic under-enforcement in terms of inspection, investigation, charges, convictions under the Fishery Act, and it has declined since 2002 throughout 2003. The most recent years, you say also that the number of inspections and warnings under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act has declined since 2005, 2006, and the number of enforcement and also investigation, prosecutions, conviction has declined steadily since 2003 to 2004.
It's our understanding that the number of prosecutions leading to conviction are very low, meaning under CEPA, in recent years, I saw the number of around 20, and I can't pinpoint the year, but that gives just a sense of the number. One would expect more than that. They may be settling out, there may be compromise, but ultimately, part of the reason we're advocating a database is so you can gain access to that information and know what exactly is happening with these files and how many are going to conviction. So, and that's part of the accountability and ensuring that government agencies and the public servants are actually going out there and enforcing the laws on the books.
So by enforcing the law, Canada could get the federal government could actually get more revenue in terms of.
Certainly, fines go back to the Crown, and so there is no disincentive to offsetting the cost of a prosecution by collecting the fine at the end of the day. And sometimes costs can be awarded in certain settings.
And do you think the fact that Environment Canada has cut 700 jobs, will that help? The budget, or will it help in terms of enforcement?
Without getting into politics too much, it doesn't sound as though a cut like that enhances capacity.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mai. We'll go to Ms. Glover and Ms. McLeod sharing the final round, please.
Thank you, and please cut me off when it's my time. Mr. McDonald, I'm coming to you. First of all, I do want to thank you very much. I, as a teenage mother, had a daughter who benefited from a big sister, and so it made her a better person. It actually made me a better parent, so thank you for that. At that time, it was only big sisters, and then you amalgamated to be big brothers and big sisters and have gone on to do great things. Quick questions. Do you have a business plan on the First Mentors Incorporated? Because I'd love to see it. Sounds interesting. I want to know what you want as far as from government to get this off the ground, because it does look like it would be a good mentorship program, but I need to know the cost you're looking for, and I would like to know what are your targeted outcomes?
So the answer is yes, we do have a business plan. The investment we're looking for is a modest support to help do a feasibility assessment to assess the market environment as to whether it'll support it. And our outcomes here are to help Canadian companies be more competitive around attracting and retaining the best and brightest minds to go to them, because they have this great mentoring program inside of it. And then from let's just be honest, a selfish perspective, we're looking for a new sustainable stream of revenue to go to support Big Brothers Big Sisters.
What I was actually looking for specifics, Mr. McDonald. I need to know dollar figures, and I need to know how many students are you looking at targeting to put with how many skilled people, because I understand generally what the plan is, and I think that's great. But if you wouldn't mind, I would encourage you to table a business plan to the committee so that we can actually see what you're asking for. What is the cost?
Yep. Sorry. What we're looking for is $75,000 to do the feasibility assessment. This actually won't target students per se. Our customer base that we believe will be vice presidents of HR and
so you want to study it first. You're not at the I would suggest you go talk to third quarter at Manitoba Chamber of Commerce.
Okay.
They actually have a program that matches, and it was brought forward in budget 2012 to match seniors who want to get back in the market through a database to employers looking for skills. You may not have to reinvent the wheel, and you may save yourself a whole lot of time.
20 seconds. Okay.
Go ahead.
Ms. McLeod, you almost 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I certainly would like to focus my time on Ms. Milden. You haven't had much of an opportunity, and I think as I listened to your first recommendation, I was quite intrigued by it, and I also, it sounded very much like it was respecting the provincial, federal jurisdictions. So if I look at, you're talking about 5 indicators readily possibly available from CIHI, so tell us more about how you perceive this to move forward, what benefit it would be. It didn't sound like it would be a very expensive thing to move forward with, and also perhaps what the benefits might be. And again, I might also put it in the context of, I know that we've done some targeting, let's say for hips, and it's actually skewed other areas when we've developed it. So talk a little bit about how you perceive this being of benefit and what it would look like.
Well, thank you so much. We are very encouraged by CIHI's work so far to identify indicators, and we are taking this ask further by asking that nurses and doctors and other health providers be at that table to help identify those indicators specifically. We also believe that with the kind of investment Canada is making in healthcare, we should be in the top 5 in these key kinds of indicators. And if we look at possible indicators, and there is a wide range of them, just one example would be the incidence and prevalence of diabetes in our country. We know that people with diabetes incur medical costs that are 2 to 3 times higher than those without diabetes. So if we were looking at that and tabling that and finding out what it is, measuring it, we could address it with a much broader strategy than we have now. So basically what we're saying is that by identifying these indicators, by agreeing on what they are, we then track them. There's a common saying that what gets measured gets managed. And we believe that this would benefit our economy and the health and well-being of Canadians.
Okay. So are you saying we're not doing that right now? Because if I look perhaps within, a provincial focus, certainly they could tell you what the diabetic rate is, how the hemoglobin A1Cs are drifting, etc. So how would this be different?
Well, we're asking the federal government to have a vision and a plan for these indicators at the federal level. We believe that that would put a national strategy in place that would have effect across the country, whereas now we do have a patchwork quilt of indicators and measures.
Okay, you've got 10 seconds if you want a brief question.
No, I think that's good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. McLeod. Ms. Glover, I wanted to thank our witnesses for being with us here today. There's been mention of some additional documents. If you do have anything to submit, please send it to the clerk. The clerk will ensure all the members get it. I want to thank you for being with us here today. Merci beaucoup pour vos présentations.
Thank you so much for your presentations and the answers to our questions. Thank you.
Thank you.